And now let's see the next presentation, Hungary's accession to the League of Nations, Hungary's return to international politics. Dr. Péter Miklós, Professor of Szeged.
Well, my presentation is very closely related to the presentation of Mr. Vizzi, because what I'm going to be talking to you about is taking place under the foreign policy ministry position of Banfi. And I think we should add to the story that there is a truncated country which is lost against the others, and somehow this country must be put on the map. Well, our story starts in June 1918 in Washington. This is the time when Wilson delivers his speech to the American Congress, his speech in which he reveals the 14 points. Usually we claim that the point number 10 is connected to the monarchy, but point number 14 is also very important. It actually says and stipulates that the General Association of Nations must be formed under specific covenants for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. Well, obviously, we can see the arch of American foreign policy from Wilson till date, and there has always been an idealistic idea that we are the Americans, we are Democrats, and we know how to settle the world, and Wilson is actually the one who starts this, and in the Wilsonian thinking that the world must be created like that, namely this is the League of Nations, and the official time of its establishment is June the 18th, 1919, and there are several ways these are called. We usually, Hungarians, call it the Népszövetség, the League of Nations. So the task and duty in front of the Hungarian elite that we should kind of fight to get to this. This is a duty because the way the League of Nations was done, it was already contradicting the Wilsonian principles, because Wilson said that each and every nation, each and every country are of equal rights. But there were 27 countries, the Entente and its allies, who claimed that, yes, we are the winners. There were 13 states about whom they stated that, okay, you were neutral, so we invite you. And then there were the losers who lost and who could not enter into the League of Nations. But it was declared that, okay, once these states will behave well, then we will scrutinize if they have their place among us. So the principle of equality has already been violated. However, the Hungarian diplomacy makes a very early step. The first submission of claim happened on February the 12th, 1920, in which Apponyi said that the Hungarian nation is an honest and spirited follower of the idea of a league between nations, with all the respect asked for admissions into this international institute of great importance. Well, this letter is immediately put into the archives, and there is only one explanation to that, because the Entente diplomats in Paris see that unless Hungary writes the peace treaty or does not really put all the details about that, then the ratification in the fall must be waited for, and then one can readdress the topic again. But Apponyi and all the other professional foreign politicians claim that yes, one can work in the background, and there are three things happening in the background. In the center of the League of Nations, Hungary is setting up an unofficial delegation. This actually has an office, and all the delegations are working on it and making sure that they enter into contact with the people working there. What Professor Vizzi said, that a personal relationship is always very important. Like, for example, the Serbians were there, all the others were there, and along dinner they could say what they wanted to say. Well, it means that then suddenly they also understood that we also have to have dinner with the Anton diplomats. And of course, the fact that in Budapest on 18th of April 1920, Hungarian Foreign Policy Association was established, well, that was also working at various names, and I don't even know what is the name of it, but currently it's the Hungarian Foreign Affairs Association. This is reorganized always when there is a change of the government, but this is the first time it is being established. And when I was making this presentation, sometimes I felt as if I was in the same situation as the Hungarian current government is fighting with the European Union, because this union of this League of Nations is like an NGO. The union of the League of Nations, it is just an NGO. It is it is playing a very important role. So also the Hungarian government's path to admission led through this union. And now we are again getting back to Miklós Bánffy. He's the one who, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who sends a letter to the General Secretary of the League of Nations. So if you look at it as an official Minister of Foreign Affairs, this is the first claim for admission, and that includes very important things, like, for example, István Tisza, who started to prevent the outbreak of the war. So we are a peace-loving nation, so if Tisza stepped up against the war, then of course we have to be admitted as well. Hungary actually meets all those criteria that all the other members of the League of Nations are meeting. So this is already the third country that we're talking about, because Austria and Bulgaria are admitted immediately. So we are the third out of the losing nations who are trying to get the admission. So they nominate a sixth committee, and when Bánffy, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, is asking all the reports from Hungarian diplomats working in some other countries, so what can you expect? If there's a voting, he gets back the notes that, yeah, Hungarians are doing very well, surely they are going to be admitted. Because this League of Nations had one General Assembly meeting always in September in Geneva, and in 1921 it looked that Hungary will be admitted, and I think that I should have put here the picture of Prónai. But you know, for Prónai, it is not only because he must, because he also prevented Hungary's first admission to the League of Nations, because when the Hungarians move out, then with the Héjas and with the Rongyos guard, they move into this, they call it as like uprising, but this was rather something that, okay, they knew that motorized gendarmerie from Austria will come, which means that they were riding a bicycle, and they were just like Robin Hood. They were shooting at the Austrian gendarmerie. This was at Ágfalva and in those smaller places, but of course this brought Hungary's admission request to a halt. What was happening, if we again look at Geneva, the Austrians appear in Geneva, and in two requests they say that the Hungarian government does not want to have peace because the guard is a hidden way of the violence coming from Hungary. And the League of Nations thought that the Austrian complaint is very important, so they actually put it on the agenda. So there's a major offensive against Hungary, and it seems that if there will be a vote, then not enough votes will be counted. Apponyi was sent to Geneva, and on the same night he has some dinners, and next morning he walks into Drummond and tells him that he, as the representative of the Hungarian government, is requesting the Secretary General to put it off, to put the vote off, which is a very sad decision, because that means the postponement of 1 year. So the Hungarian diplomacy considers, is closing this with a total failure. So when we talk about Prónai, maybe this thread of Geneva should be also incorporated into the story. Now we jump in the time, so this is the conference, and this is where at the first time after the closing of the World War, so once again we had the vote from Sopron, the Habsburgs are also dethroned, so there's a favorite milieu developing, but the Little Entente must beat Hungary in a preventive way all the time. So there is in Prague a consultation, and there's a big press offensive launched against Hungary. So if you compare it with today, it is quite a big similarity. The kingdom is accusing Hungary because of some border incidents, which is because actually such a bad way of it was such a bad way of drawing the borders, because sometimes some Hungarian peasants have their house in one country, but their land is in another one. So, of course, it is ending up in some clashes, but it's again difficult to say whether it's the Serbian gendarmerie that starts it or the Hungarian peasants or the other way around. So anyway, there are 3 young people. It is, for example, there was an example as well that 3 young people want to kill the Romanian king or something like that. The Czech say that Hungary is not respecting the peace treaty. It is actually not only the allied forces who were coming to Hungary to check, but even the Beneš's representatives were coming to Hungary to see how the military is doing. So we can see that September the 7th, 1922, which is like 3 weeks before this is being voted for, Ludon, but it is not the problem, but Stefan Osuski, who is the right hand of Beneš, who is trying to influence the committee whether Hungary is up to the military conditions that are set against him. So if we see some similarities between now and then, it is not just by accident. So now this commission is making its examination, so Czech are pretty tough against us. And then on September 18, 1922, you see Stefan Osuski, who in his speech, he attacked Hungary. He has a long speech, namely that the military points are violated. For example, that one of the age group was conscripted in Miskolc and in Debrecen as well. So that means that the Czech intelligentsia was doing quite a great job. And the anti-Semitism, the numerus clausus act, and the Czech complaint is that Hungarians are not respecting Jewish minorities. So he delivers his big speech, and 44 countries are present. So we get 44 yeses, which is a unanimous support. This is there are like 44 countries and we have 44 yeses. That means that despite the very bad speech of Osuski blaming us for many things, but still he would be saying yes in terms of supporting us. So yeah, this is diplomacy. And now in the closing part of my presentation, I would just like to tell you that well, here I would like to set here two important things. Number one is that the political rehabilitation. So about Hungary, they talked about like a war criminal, like the Huns who came from Asia and who are massacring who are doing a massacre against the poor Romanians. But in this league, when they admit us, that means that we have become an equal partners vis-à-vis each and every country. So we are not criminals of war anymore, but let me just tell you that in the Hungarian edition of 1919 BBC, there is a statement that we Hungarians are criminals of war. And the second one is more room for political maneuvering. It's a playground. Within the League of Nations, Hungary could try to protect his own interests and achieve some alleviations. I actually cut it into 4 various fields, and I put up this picture not because it's so colorful, but rather as to how the military relations looked back in 1920s, and I put up this 4 points. The question of disarmament, because that was also the League of Nations idea that each and every state should disarm. It is, you see how much overpowered the Entente were having. But if disarmament applies to everyone, namely to Entente as well, that their military overpower could decrease. The defense against the Little Entente, let me again refer back to October 1921, the second royal coup d'etat, when Benes and the Romanians and the Serbians were considering to march in to Budapest to run over Horthy. And there's Article 10 which said that if every country, if any country within the League of Nations is attacked, then it is considered as an attack against all the League of Nations countries. So that means that once we were admitted, we were actually protected against the Little Entente. The next chapter is the possibility of a revision, which means that if some of the member states think that some of the provisions are already obsolete, they could have and sit down and talk about a peaceful revision. And the last one is the defense of minorities. Let us not forget that we consider Trianon as a very hot topic, because back at that time, 1920s, 3 million Hungarians got into a minority position. And of course, the League of Nations was actually protecting very much the contracts with the minorities, and Zeller Ferenc wrote 2 books about it, namely as to how Hungary was trying to fine-tune the minority-related proposals. And while the League of Nations was up and running, of course, the minority issues were always kept on the agenda. They were talking about it, but the procedural order was not too favorable for Hungary. And finally, let us say a few words about Albert Apponyi, who was already quite old. When he delivered his speech of defense, he was 67 in 1920, and he died in 13 years later, and he spoke several languages. He was very knowledgeable about the special Geneva lingua that was used in that League of Nations up to his death in 1933. So it was still a very important area for protecting the Hungarian minorities, and it was not to be blamed on Apponyi that he was not too successful, because as I started my presentation, the American foreign policy was doing its best to make sure that the League of Nations is becoming absolutely unviable, because those who created it, they were not even working in Geneva for many, many years. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Distinguished audience, those who lost, those who were run over by some others, and the shrinking of the room for maneuvering and playing round, how this was shrinking. And when we talk about that, and it has also been raised at this conference 4 weeks ago also, whether we had to sign the Treaty of Trianon or not. Well, all the winning powers considered ratification of that as a starting point. I think that also the isolation and that kind of spiritual feelings that people were having when all the reports were coming from Paris, they were always emphasizing how many people they could talk to, and how much they were reassuring them that they are very much in favor of Hungary. But you know, there was no real reason for us to be idealistic.